welcome back to our run through of Thomas Carlyle's French Revolution. We're on Volume 1, Book 3, the Parlement of Paris, or the Parlement of Paris. And as you can see before you, I've got the Wikipedia page of the Parlement of Paris open, because there's just a few. The idea of what the Parlement of Paris was before the Revolution is quite important. It was not sort of like a parliament in Westminster that governed the entire kingdom. It was the oldest parliament in the Kingdom of France and had been around since the 13th century. And if we head into the Parlement, on the eve of the Revolution, this is what they looked like, with the Parlement of Paris taking up Paris, Tours, Reims. It would really take up the great bulk of what was considered core France. Toulouse and Bordeaux in the south, Parlement d'Ice, which has Mirabeau giving oratories in it in the 1780s, Grenoble, Metz, sort of old Voltaire territory out to the east, and then of course Brittany would have its own distinctive style, and they would have a Parlement de Rennes, and there was a Parlement of Rouen for sort of what was separate Normandy. So Parlement of Paris, important, not a legislator, but an important gathering, and also quite restrictive in its attendance. Who was able to be a representative there. So, without further ado, we'll move to Chapter 1 of Book 3, Dishonoured Bills. So, Carlyle has, in Book 1, has gone through the death of Louis XV, who abhorred the Parlement de Paris and wanted it abolished. I think it was abolished for 4 years before his death, 1770 to 1774. It then returns in 1774 with the new king. So by 1789, it had been returned some 15 years as a power, even in its limited state. Its existence had a history sometimes of irritating French monarchs who wanted to rule through their person alone and their immediate circle from Versailles. And then in Book 2, so Book 1 is the death of Louis XV, and then Book 2 is where Carlyle talks about the paper age and how people like Voltaire and Diderot had seen their ideas sort of manifest and circle more widely throughout society by the 1780s, and saw a lot of the reforms that were trying to be done by Controller General of the Finances, like a Turgot or a Necker, as a step in the right direction, the step in the reform they wanted France to take. But as Carlyle points out in Dishonoured Bills, none of this is yet leading towards conflagration of the size of what the revolution is going to be. So he says, through what crevice will the main explosion carry itself? Because it won't come through this idea of reform. Through which of the old craters or chimneys? Or must it at once form a new crater for itself? So he's going to talk about the Parlement of Paris, and he's gearing up towards the Estates General and the Third Estate in the later books. But he has to first tell you about how the older institutions were sort of either trying to increase their own power or realizing the limitations of their own power, and hence the gathering for a call for an Estates General would get louder and louder. He says, we may say that this French explosion will doubtless first try all old institutions of escape, and this is one of them. Through the law parlements, above all, through the Parlement of Paris. So it was a provincial appellate court, so that's why he's talking about the law parlements. Like old Monsieur de Maurepas, who we met in the last one, he talks about, since the end of 1781, had been fixed in the frost of death. He's sort of a figure who's seen and done it all in the 18th century, and he does find himself overseeing or trying to oversee the ancien regime and some of the old ways. Nevermore, said the good Louis, shall I hear his step in the room there overhead. That's a reference to Michaud's Biographie universelle ancienne et moderne, which was published in Paris in between 1811 and 1833, so it would have been quite a popular French history of the time. I also notice he talks about these, thou too, O heavens, mayest become a political power, and with the shakings of thy horsehair wig shake principalities with dynasties like a very Jove its ambrosial curls. Referencing the Iliad there, so we've had him referencing the Bible a lot. We've had him referencing Shakespeare, and he throws in the Iliad, some Homer for good measure. So Maurepas on the way out. He's tried to oversee the reform in a sort of old manner, the usual methods that he tried throughout the 18th century, but these are tried methods that we know will now not work for this blabbering classes, these classes that have received their energy from the paper age. In him is no remedy, this is Maurepas, only clerk-like dispatch of business according to routine. The poor king, grown older yet hardly more experienced, and this is what we talked about, that Louis XVI did not show any genuine youthful energy that was beyond or removed from just youthful naivety in his attempts to reform. If a distressed people has its cry, so likewise, and more audibly, has a bereaved court. Deficit of revenue, you must choke, comble the deficit, or else it will swallow you. So we're back into the same problems Turgot had around reforming the finances. And the choking of the deficit is from Lactel's Histoire de France. Il trouvait le moyen de combler ces déficits. In vain has our newly devised Council of Finances struggle, our Intendants of Finances, Controller General of Finances. There are unhappily no finances to control. Are we breaking down, then, into the black horrors of national bankruptcy? We said this always loomed over France. Particularly, it had lost 7 Years' War, and then it backed America in the War of Independence, and it really has run itself dry. So we're on to Chapter 2, The Controller Calonne. And here he is, Charles-Alexandre de Calonne, 20th of January 1734 to the 30th of October 1802. He's got still a bit to go. Realizing that the Parlement of Paris would never agree to reform, Calonne handpicked an assembly of notables, and we're going to get to that. Though, when is he instated as controller? Here we go. He's been in since the 3rd of November 1783, and he will reign until 1787. Reign as Controller General, I suppose. That's who is beginning to reign now in this paper age. But he will be in that position until he realizes the limitations of the Parlement of Paris. So this is our figure then. And really, in Chapter 2, Carlyle is just giving an introduction to him as a figure. And then also in Chapter 3, he's going to give an introduction to the other part of the plan that Calonne is going to come up with. Which is, his hand-picked assembly of notables. So Chapter 3 is the notables. And who are they? Well, Monsieur de Calonne has stretched out an Adam's rod over France, miraculous, and is summoning quite unexpected things. Audacity and hope alternate in him with misgivings. Though the sanguine valiant side carries it. The Adam's rod, of course, being another biblical reference to Numbers. Book of Numbers. He anon invites dedicated poet or poetaster to sing this assembly of notables and the revolution that it is preparing. That is from the Biography Universelle of Calonne by Guizot. That reference, that this assembly of notables, the revolution that is preparing. So that is a quote from its own French history. We can see here that, to go to a bit more detail perhaps than Carlyle's fragrant languages, or just to give a list of it to get your head around it, Calonne's eventual reform package, which was introduced to the Assembly of Notables, consists of 5 major points. To cut government spending, okay, Carlyle's mentioned that. Revive free trade methods, authorize the sale of church property. These are ways of balancing the books. It's all quite financial. Equalize salt and tobacco taxes, establish a universal land value tax. So there's very little here that's what outside the realms of finance. He is a controller general of the finances, yet his dismissal of the Parlement of Paris goes well beyond that. That is a dismissal of a court, and the Assembly of Notables becomes its own political engine. So even though these 5 aims are entirely financial, the ramifications of them are enormous, and they spread out through law and through the body politic. And then Carlyle has been quite vague to us on dates so far, but because we know this is all 1787, he does eventually tell us on this 22nd day of February 1787 they have met and got installed. So we have the Notables installed to try and enact the vision of Calonne, which he knew the Parlement of Paris cannot do. We observe finally that Count Mirabeau has actually arrived. Well, this is the Mirabeau from the south. He descends from Berlin on the scene of action. He obviously gone via Berlin. And glares into it with a flashing sun glance, discerns that it will do nothing for him. He had hoped for these Notables might need a secretary. They do not need one, but are fixed on Dupont de Nemours, a man of smaller fame, but then of better. So Mirabeau had hoped to become a secretary among the Notables in this new organ of state, to inject himself into power through it. But he quickly realizes he is not wanted. Instead, they've got this man, Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, then of more fame than Mirabeau, but of lesser stature as a whole in terms of the character. And here we see in 1784 he was ennobled from the king, Louis XVI, so he's much more within the courts and ennobled than Mirabeau is a Count Mirabeau, but he's not within the regime as much as this figure Dupont de Nemours. So really Mirabeau is disappointed because they've gone for this sort of insider. This is the epitome of our controller's difficulties. Provincial assemblies, which we discussed, are these parlements, these provincial parlements. You've got Besançon as its own. Forget it even, of course, before you even get there, because Toulouse is doing its own thing, Bordeaux is doing its own thing, Dijon is doing its own thing. Provincial assemblies, new taxation. Yeah, well, how do you want to create greater taxation if you're in the Parlement of Paris? How are you doing so in some of the other parlements that do not want to go along with it? Now, strangers of all the new land tax, what he calls subvention territoriale, from which neither privileged nor unprivileged noblemen, clergy, nor parliamentarians shall be exempt. So he's going for a land tax in which no one's going to be exempt. And this is the controller de Calonne. We've seen his 5 points here. And then this is the universal land value tax. Heavy laden controller in the 7 bureaus seems nothing but hindrance. So he's getting bogged down, Calonne. He's try to create this Parliament of Notables, but has he really solved anything? The blame of his deficit our brave Calonne, as was natural, had endeavoured to shift from himself on his predecessors, not accepting even Necker. We can see here he was succeeded immediately by Jacques Necker, who will return, but for now he was not Controller General until after Calonne, but he did hold a finance post between 1777 and 1781. As remember, taking the president's step in 1781 of making public the country's budget. Novelty in an absolute monarch where the state of finances had always been kept a secret. So he had tried his own level of reform, but even Calonne is turning against him in order to try and ease the blame, or the reasons for his failures were all in his predecessors. But now, while ex-controller Calonne flies storm-driven, still on the Notables, but ex-controller Calonne flies storm-driven over the horizon in a singular way, what has become of the controllership? It hangs vacant, one may say, extinct. So I've skipped over a bit here, where clearly the heavy-laden controller, it becomes too much for him. And Necker does take to the stage 25th of August 1788. Believe we're at that stage. Notables, an actual new controller is certain and even ready, were the indispensable manoeuvres but gone through. Long-headed Lamoignon, with Home Secretary Pt.3, Foreign Secretary Montmartin have exchanged looks. Loménie Brienne, who had all his life, quote, felt a kind of predestination for high offices, has now therefore obtained them. He presides over the finances. He shall have the title of Prime Minister itself, and the effort of his long life be realized. He is talking about Etienne Charles de Loménie de Brienne, clergyman, bishop, cardinal, politician, finance minister, and Louis XVI. He's de facto in charge. We will get to Necker. He will appear eventually, but we're not there yet. So immediately after Calonne's departure, we can see here, in 1787, the Assembly noticed Loménie de Brienne led the position of the fiscal policy of Calonne. Close to the Queen Marie Antoinette, Loménie de Brienne was then appointed to succeed him. Once in power, he succeeded in making the Parlement register edicts dealing with internal free trade, one of Calonne's original points. So Calonne becomes too much for her, he flees. Maybe the figure becomes unpopular, but the policies remain. The long life of Loménie de Brienne was born in October 1727. He finally gets to the position he needs to. Not in vain has Loménie studied the working of the British Constitution, for he professes to have some Anglo-mania of sort. The notables, mollified by Easter festivities, by the sacrifice of Calonne, this is again Carlyle's use of language, that Calonne has become almost the effigy figure for even the notables. Of course, he's famous in this revolution for Carlyle for his depiction of the crowd scenes and the frenzy of the crowd, but here he gives even some of it to the so-called notables who are being called here. They need the sacrifice, something more primitive, even though it's decorated as something else, something more official. It was effectively a sacrifice of Calonne. By some historians, sitting much at their ease in a safe distance, Loménie has been blamed for this dismissal of his notables. Nevertheless, it was clearly time. So, Loménie is not going to fall foul to the same problem that his predecessor Calonne had, because on the 25th of May, 1787, solemn final session, there bursts forth what he can call explosion of eloquence. King Loménie, Lamoignon, of the inner court of the king, and retinue taking up the successive train in harangues to the number of 10 besides his majesty, which lasts the livelong day, whereby, in a kind of choral anthem, a bravura peal of thanks, praises, promises, the notables are, so to speak, organed out, dismissed to their respective places of abode. They had sat and talked some 9 weeks. They were the first notables since Richelieu's in the year 1626. But now they're gone. The king says he must go back to the ideals of his father, Louis XV, says enough about the Parlement that hasn't solved anything, neither is this assembly of notables. They're trying to come up with new structures and methods that can solve the finances of France, and these are, of course, become political issues. That's really what the book Parlement Paris is about. 7 bureaus where no work could be done unless talk were work. Classic Carlylism there is disgust for people whose work was not really work but was in talk. He would have had much more admiration for someone who was a simple farmer, someone who would have gotten his hands to work, than this sort of class. You see a similar level of contempt to the blabbering classes that sit underneath Voltaire. Questionable matters were coming up, and these were just talking. And so then he's on to chapter 4, Loménie's Edicts. And we did mention that he was going to have some edicts, and here they are. Thus then have the notables returned home, carrying to all quarters of France such notions of deficit, decrepitude, distraction, and that States General will cure it. So we're heading towards the States General. The individual parlements and this assembly of notables are both failed ideas. We need a States General to cure it. We're going to go to a third idea of assembly. Or it's still in their mind, still as an idea, it's hatching. What will not cure it but kill it? And then we see the undercurrent of where the revolution will go. If we can't cure it, we will kill it. Each notable, we may fancy, is as a funeral torch disclosing hideous abysses better left hid. You can see there Carlyle's opinion on what you're doing when you're killing it. This is the bottomless pit, the abyss, which he alluded that the paper age was beginning to open up, and now these are the old institutions of France creaking and straining under that. O Loménie, what a wild, heaving, waste-looking, hungry and angry world hast thou, after lifelong effort, got promoted to take charge of. Loménie's first edicts are mere soothing ones, creation of a provincial assembly. Oil cast on the waters has been known to produce a good effect. Before venturing with great essential measures, Loménie will see the singular swell of public mind abate somewhat. The creation of the provincial assemblies were on the 22nd of June, 1787. Swell of the public mind being a quote from Montgaillard. Loménie himself can devise an Edit du Timbre, or stamp tax, borrowed, also it is true, but then from America. May it prove luckier in France than there. We need not really talk about the effects of the stamp tax had on the American Revolution, or the spark that it caused. The very peerage is infected with leaven. Again, another biblical reference there, Matthew 16:6. Chapter 5, Loménie's Thunderbolts. And we did talk about the fact, Carlyle mentioned there that he was soothing them before he came in with the heavy artillery, so to speak. Not literally, we'll get to that. There'll be literal artillery later, but for now it's in the form of these edicts. O Loménie with a red right hand launch it among these Demosthenic theatrical thunder barrels, mere reason and noise for most part. Again, just his absolute detest for the chatterer, and throwing the ancient Greek Demosthenes under the bus as well by describing these as Demosthenic. I suppose Carlyle there is really thinking, yes, we have Demosthenes' Philippics, which forewarn Athens of the incursions of Philip of Macedon into their country. But Carlyle probably would have gone back at them and gone, well, what good did any of it do? You know, the invasion still occurred. So Demosthenes was all talk, no action. Couldn't muster the action required to save Athens then. And so the chattering here is Demosthenic. Parlement of Paris does its utmost to defend the indefensible, the abominable, nay, what is singular, dusky glowing, Aristogiton, Desprémenil is the man chosen to be its spokesman in that. And so we have another character. And this is the man, Jean-Jacques Duval de Prémenil. We could see, actually born in Pondicherry, India, which is the old French garrison and colony out in India. Returned showed bitter enmity to Marie Antoinette in the matter of the diamond necklace, which came up in the paper age. It was this scandal that broke about her. Well, let's go into it. Let's remind ourselves. The affair of the diamond necklace was an incident from 1784 to 85 in the court of Louis XVI. Confidence trickster who called herself Jeanne de Valois Saint-Remy made a plan to use the necklace to gain wealth and possibly power over the royal patronage. So it's this. It really is this idea, the diamond necklace scandal, that Marie Antoinette was willing to sell something which should have been sacred. That idea of royal power and assertion for the trinket of the necklace. It's not really it's a bit more than a trinket, but it is something material. She was willing to sell that immaterial magisterial power for something material. It really didn't make her popular. It made her seem corrupt. It made her seem as if she was someone who could be bought. And his trust and sway at court was bought for. So now, as a spokesman of the Parlement of Paris, in steps de Prémenil, who is a bit of an agitator in that regard. The exiled Parlement is felt to have covered itself with glory. Well, of course, they would call consider themselves to have done so. There are quarrels in which even Satan bringing help were not unwelcome. Again, this is the idea that if we cannot cure it, we will kill it. They're getting closer and closer. The notables, people who sit among the Parlement of Paris, they've been dismissed now. So the Parlement actually sits daily at 3, which is still in the jurisdiction of the Parlement of Paris, because we've had a look at that. Here we can see the boundaries of the Parlement of Paris. 3 is included in here, so they're sitting at 3 rather than Paris. But they're not technically outside their own jurisdiction. 3 is as hospitable as could be looked for. Nevertheless, one has comparatively a dull life. No crowds now to carry you shoulder high to the immortal gods. Scarcely a patriot or two will drive out so far and bid you be of firm courage. To be of firm courage, coming from the book of Isaiah. Now, it's difficult to know exactly where Carlyle is positioning himself in this argument. He seems to think, yes, that there's a lot of talk amongst these notables, but if you're ousted and you're in 3, I think there probably is a genuine grievance there to be had that you're sitting so far away from the genuine seat of power, that you have become nothing but a token. But he seems to turn that on its head here and says that what they really miss in Paris is not actually the ability to enact genuine change, but the vanity which comes with being seen among the crowds as somebody who can then ascend. Now, of course, Carlyle goes a bit further and says they want to ascend to become immortal gods just to make it look even more foolish of their own aspirations. But nevertheless, he's possibly being a little harsh on some of them here. And after a dull month, the Parlement, yielding and retaining, makes truce, as all parlements must. The stamp tax is withdrawn. So the great Loménie de our new controller of finance, his great stamp tax is withdrawn. So it did not work out the way he wanted to. The subvention land tax is also withdrawn. Oh dear. But in its stead there is granted what they call a prorogation of the second 20th, itself a kind of land tax, but not so oppressive to the influential classes. And here we see where the real murmuring from the lower classes is going to begin. There has been a massive protest about the increase of land tax and stamp taxes from the people of the Parlement, and they got ousted and they got their way, but they didn't change it back for everybody. They did not change it back for the good of the people. They came back and made their own situation better, and bugger be the rest. So of the ugly word States General, which was before Loménie de Brienne wrote back, which was the murmurings of the Parlement, there shall be no mention. And so on the 20th of September our exiled Parlement returns. But we're not done. Loménie is not done yet. He's not going to walk like Calonne did. He's not going to leave so easily. So we're on to chapter 6, Loménie's plots. Hope is nowhere if not in the old refuge of loans, says Carlyle. The purpose of the royal breast is signified. 2 edicts for the Protestant emancipation for successive loan, of both which edicts our trustworthy Garde des Sceaux Lamoignon will explain the purport, on both which a trusty Parlement is requested to deliver its opinion, each member having free privilege of speech. So where will we go? Well, the Parlement will nowise acquiesce meekly, and sit to register the Protestant edict, and do its other work in salutary fear of these 3 lettres de cachet. Now, the lettres de cachet, Brienne's lettres de cachet, issued against the members of the Parlement in August 1787, or was what had gotten them to Troyes in the first place, is not forgotten. In all former contests, as Malzebe remarks, it was the Parlement that excited the public, but here it is the public that excites the Parlement. And so we see a little bit of, we got into it when they got rid of the land tax and stamp tax for their own gain. This idea that the disgruntlement would now come from different avenues, and so it is now that the Parlement is no longer disgruntled by its own agitation, but is still sort of agitated because of old grudges against Loménie de Brienne, but is also getting an agitation from below. Chapter 7. Internecine. It is too clear our successive loan is not filling, as indeed in such circumstances a loan registered by expunging of protests was not the likeliest to fill. Denunciation of the lettre de cachet of despotism generally abates not. The 12 Parlements are busy, the 1200 placarders, ballad singers, pamphleteers also. Paris is what, in figurative speech, they call flooded with pamphlets, regorge de brochures. Flooded and eddying again, hot, deluge. Now that use of the word deluge is always quite powerful. I think there was a very good book on the First World War and its implications by Adam Tooze entitled The Deluge. And of course, the deluge is not just Noah's flood in the Bible, which of course is always seen as this epoch-changing moment, but it also goes back to Deucalion and is seen in old Mesopotamian texts. So it's this ancient idea of the deluge of a sea change. On the whole, what can a poor government do but once more recoil, ineffectual? Oh, Parlement of Paris, what a clamour was that! Monsieur, said old Dumasson, you will get States General, and you will repent it. Like the horse in the fable, who to be avenged of his enemy applied to the man mounted, did swift execution on the enemy, but unhappily would not dismount. Very good lines there from Carlyle. Which is, a horse wants to avenge the enemy, lets the man mount on it so that he can avenge the enemy. But once that is done, the man does not dismount. You are using a vehicle to obtain an end, but in so doing, you are giving the vehicle power which you cannot undo. And you are losing control of the situation. He's already referenced the Sea of Troubles in Hamlet in relation to the deluge. He's referenced Paradise Lost in a drift towards chaos. He's mentioned Ecclesiastes, again when he talks of the madness of men. He talked about that inner madman in the previous episodes. And now he mentions the Odyssey, because he says the fruit seemed within clutch, Odyssey book 11, of course referencing Tantalus and hell. To sit and die of deficit is no part of Loménie's plan. The evil is considerable, but can he not remove it? Can he not attack it at lowest? He can attack the symptom of it. These rebellious parlements he can attack, and perhaps remove. To tame the Parlement, to fill the king's coffers, these are now life and death questions. Parlements have been tamed, more than once. What if the Parliament supplies were cut off? Namely, its lawsuits. We've seen again that it is a court of appellant. Minor courts for the trying of innumerable minor causes might be instituted. These would be called grand balayage. So, instead of the Parlement of Paris having concentrated power, let us have more numerous but less powerful courts dealing with smaller and minor charges, or minor courts dealing with smaller stuff. So you'll never get the great assembly of bodies. Of course, this is Loménie de Brienne wanting to move in the opposite direction to the States General. Make a thing we could call the plenary court, and there, so to speak, Saint Louis had his plenary court of great barons most useful to him. Such is the Lamoignon device, Lamoignon being the other member of the Versailles cabinet, the inner cabinet to Louis XVI. Behold accordingly a Home Secretary Bethuel beautifying Paris in the peaceablest manner in this hopeful spring weather of 1788. So we have passed the new year and we are into 1788. Brienne says nothing of finance. So this sort of financial matters calm down for a bit. We talk of the Home Secretary beautifying Paris. And that comes from Weber's Le Baron de Bethuel s'appliqua à l'embellissement de Paris. This Bremenil has ordered horses to Versailles. prowls round that guarded printing office. D'Espremesnil again is this man, the Speaker of the Parlement, or the Notables, Jean-Jacques Duval, born in Pondicherry. To a shower of gold, most things are penetrable. This is the shower of gold. D'Espremesnil descends on the lap of a printer's denier in the shape of 500 louis d'or. The denier husband smuggles back clay to her, which she delivers to the Golden Council of the Parlement. So we're still seeing backhanders to keep people in power, to try and keep them quiet. Of course, Carlyle references Danae was visited by Zeus in a shower of gold, coming from Horace's Odes. Chapter 8, Loménie's Death-throes. 3rd of May, 1788. An astonished Parlement sits convoked. Listens speechless to the speech of D'Espremesnil. The Speaker. Unfolding the infinite misdeeds, deed of treachery, of unhallowed darkness, of such as despotism loves, denounce it, O Parlement of Paris, awaken France and the universe, roll what thunder barrels of forensic eloquence thou hast with thee too, it is verily now or never. This is the death throes of the Parlement, as we can see here on the entry, Wikipedia entry for Etienne Charles de Loménie de Brienne, just to give some context to what Carlyle is talking about. The struggle of Parlement against Loménie de Brienne ended on the 8th of May, and it's consenting to an edict for its own abolition, with the proviso that the States General should be summoned to remedy the disorders of the state. So the Parlement do vote for an edict of their own dissolution because they think something the Estates General is going to come around the corner. But hark through the dead of midnight, what trap is this? Tramp, as of armed men, foot and horse, Garde Française, Garde Suisse, marching hither in silent regularity in the flare of torchlight. There are sappers, too, with axes and crowbars, apparently if the doors open not, they will be forced. It is Captain d'Agoust. Mission from Versailles. D'Agoust, a man of known firmness, who once forced Prince Condé himself by mere incessant looking at him to give satisfaction and fight. And again, that's a reference to Weber. Who is this armed man that Carlyle is talking about? So we can see here, really, he gets his fame solely through Carlyle, who must have taken a liking to him. And it is on the act of the 4th of May, 14 months before the Revolution, the captain of the Garde Française. I suppose you would have to be a tough individual to be captain of that guard. Acting on the order of the Court of Versailles, marched the Parlement of Paris out of the Palais de Justice and removed the key from the premises. So it was ultimately, they voted for their own abolition, but it's through characters like this, it's through the captain of the Garde Française, d'Agoust, who really kick them out of the Parlement of Paris and shut it for good. Monsieur, thus spoke D'Espremesnil, Speaker. When the victorious Gauls entered Rome, which they had carried by assault, the Roman senators, clothed in their purple, sat there in their curule chairs with a proud and tranquil countenance, awaiting slavery or death. Such, too, is the lofty spectacle which you, in this hour, offer to the universe, ad l'univers, after having generously, with much more of the like, as can still be read. So Carlyle sort of cuts him off there. He's like, yeah, well, D'Espremesnil was the speaker. He references Rome, but he's kind of, at the end of the day, D'Espremesnil is a talker, and he's one of these talkers that Carlyle doesn't like because it's all talk, no action. Carlyle would have much more time for a man such as Captain d'Agoust, who just goes in, shuts the Parlement of Paris, takes the key, goodbye. The people revolt not. So it's at this point Carlyle thinks it's interesting that there is no revolt. We're in the 7th of May, or we're around the 8th of May, 1788. Not a famous date in French history because there is no revolt associated with that date. So the people do not revolt, they only wonder and grumble. So this is an interesting point in that there are a lot of these catalyst moments throughout history, and when you're living through it, it's very hard to tell which one will be such a moment. Even if you're calling the trend in the correct direction. So you could be a nice, enlightened thinker or blabberer, possibly as Carlyle would call them, talker, who enthused about the paper age and said there would be reform, or perhaps you could even have been someone who said reform would be impossible, that they would shut everything down, that things would get worse, and there would be a tumult and a revolt. And if you were living through that at this point, you would think you're wrong, because you would think, well, the Parlement of Paris just got shut, and there is no revolt. So if it doesn't happen now, it's possibly never going to happen. So that's just an indication there. It's very difficult when you're living through these things to know what will be the catalytic moment. Loménie has removed the evil then? Not at all, says Carlyle. Sorry, Loménie, you don't get to win. This chapter is entitled Loménie's Death-throes, after all. Not at all, so much as the symptom of the evil, scarcely the 12th part of the symptom, and exasperated the other 11. Think about it. Go back to the main problem we had. Parlement of Paris is but one of the parliaments in all of France. It is one of 12. So you have only closed 1/12 of the problem. Now it is the largest and most influential, but the other parliaments are open for discussion, and they've seen what's happened to their neighbour. The highways are covered with grand deputations of parlements, proceeding to Versailles, to have their registers expunged by the king's hand, or returning home to cover a new page with a new resolution still more audacious. Such is the France of this year, 1788. Not now a golden or paper age of hope, with its horse racings, balloon flyings, and finer sensibilities of the heart. Gone is that. Its golden effulgence paled, but darkened in this singular manner, brewing towards a preternatural weather. And Carlyle loves that term, preternatural. Again, it echoes his idea of the madman being within someone, and then this preternatural weather being under, I suppose mixed metaphors, but weather being capable of showing up. It's a preternatural element. In the military school hard by, there sat, studying mathematics, a dusky, complexioned, taciturn boy, under the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. It's a nice little call out there by Carlyle. Loménie invites Necker to come and be controller of the finances. So now, a bit later than I had anticipated, so apologies for that, we do get Necker to be controller of the finances. Necker has other work in view than controlling finances for Loménie. With a dry refusal, he stands taciturn, awaiting his time. So you can see here, Loménie is not going to go as easily as Calonne went. And so he invites Necker to be his inside man, but Necker has a look and goes, I am not associating myself with you. There will come my own time, where I will get to be in charge, and I will not be working under your guys. So Loménie kind of runs out of ideas and he departs. Rich, if court titles and money bonds can enrich him, but if these cannot, perhaps the poorest of all extant men. Again, interesting there, juxtaposition between that plight of Loménie de Brienne, his failure to reform the finances and troubles of France, that he leaves with the money bonds and the court titles. But really he has failed in his aspiration to be up among the immortal gods himself. Now Carlyle attributed that with the members of the Parlement, but it's true with Loménie de Brienne himself. And it's also interesting to compare that with that idea that you can have all this material wealth if you have lost the idea of the aspirant or the immaterial view, the gain that you're going for. You have lost it all, really. You've lost your inner fight. And Carlyle really would have seen that. You've lost your inner greatness. And that's also an indictment that had been against Marie Antoinette in the diamond necklace scandal. So we're almost done with the Parlement of Paris. We just have one short chapter left. Chapter 9. Burial with Bonfire. Necker is recalled, and all is going well. So Necker was standing back and waiting for Loménie de Brienne to leave. He has now gone. So all France resounds with the cry of Vive le Roi, Vive Monsieur Necker. So again, the sacrifice play is made. Did the sacrifice play work when Calonne left? No. Will the sacrifice play work now Loménie de Brienne has left? No. What are the states of France like? Well, now there's not even a Parlement of Paris, so everything is far more agitated than it ever was. And he closes with this. He closes Book 1, Volume 3 with this. Old Duc de Richelieu, moribund in these autumn days, opens his eyes once more, murmuring, "What would Louis XIV, whom he remembers, have said?" Then closes them again, forever, before the evil time. So Necker's in, but Carlyle always likes to reference this sort of the fading out generation. And that's what this Richelieu, with an old name like Richelieu as well, really symbolizes old France. He remembers Louis XIV. With a name like Richelieu, he echoes back the idea, Cardinal Richelieu, those sort of years in France, they're all in the past. Richelieu leaves the scene of the world with, oh, what would Louis XIV have thought of all of this? And we're now ready for Book 4, Volume 1, Book 4, which is the States General. So as we can tell, there's always been murmur of the States General. They've shut down the Parlement of Paris, but the other parliaments are up. There's too much energy around the notable classes. They will get their States General before we really enter the tumult, the explosion, as Carlyle says.